Welcome to the latest episode of 5 on the Floor on the 5 Reasons Sports Network. Thanks for joining us on your favorite podcast app, on Apple Podcasts, on Android, Spotify, and the 5 Reasons YouTube channel. Make sure to hit like, subscribe, turn the notifications on. We recommend you be over there because when we do our live shows, you get them there first. Also, check out Off the Floor. Speaking of first, that's where we put things first these days. Not just in the host updates channel, but all of us pop into that main chat and communicate with Heat fans pretty much 24/7. 10 different channels there, plus the stage shows. Some of our guys in our group are going live on the stage there after games. You can't get that content anywhere else either. So check out Off the Floor. Link right here in the description. You can bypass the Apple upcharge if you use that link. So it's a $1 upcharge. You won't have to pay it, just the $2.99 per month, and you can cancel at any time. Click all the way through. Make sure you pay. That's how you get access to all the channels. Also, check out the great sponsors of the 5 Reasons Sports Network. Includes our friends over at Water Cleanup of Florida, WCUFL.com. Michael Robert and his team will take you through the entire process. If you have a leak in your home, your business, they do the preventative maintenance. They also do the leak detection. And then if there is damage, they'll do the damage assessment. It's your one-stop water and mold cleanup shop. More than 100 5-star reviews on Google, based in Boca Raton. Service the entire Tri-County area. Again, it's Water Cleanup of Florida. It's WCUFL.com. If you've got the schmutz,
they got the guts.
And now, today's episode.
Down the bitch gang.
Yikes. 5 on the floor, ride for my dogs. Where here's the thing, you can check the score. Hustle hard, couple scars, wearing rubber frauds. Just like Butler said, you in trouble, y'all. Kept the floor playing, got it all banned. Y'all seen the block, stop with one hand. And Pat, we trust.
You sound scared.
It's power, have the guts. We're here to bring the heat. Y'all can hang it up.
Welcome to 5 on the Floor, a daily insider show on the Miami Heat and the NBA, featuring Ethan Skolnick, Greg Sylvander, Alex Toledo, Brady Hawk, and others from the 5 Reasons Sports Network. Also, make sure to subscribe to Off the Floor for the most heat anywhere.
All right, welcome back to 5 on the Floor. Here's today's floor plan. I'm Ethan Skolnick. You can follow me at Ethan J. Skolnick at 5 Reasons Sports. Got Greg Sylvander. You can follow me at Greg Sylvander. I apologize in advance again for the quality of my voice at this stage. Some of you have been dealing with various ailments around South Florida, and it seems that it struck me as well. Speaking of ailments, there's been a lot that's ailed the Miami Heat over the first half of the season, but we have hit the halfway point, and the vibes are kind of back. The Heat with a big win against the Spurs. Just as things look their bleakest, they unveiled Wham. And yes, I'm going with Wham. I know it dates me. I'm a child of the 80s. I was born in 73. At that time, Wham was one of those sort of one-hit wonders that kind of became a little bit bigger, George Michael and all that. And they had an exclamation point at the end, Wham. Again, this is when way over the top of our followers on Twitter, most of whom were 20 years away from being embryos at that stage. But I'm going with Wham because I'm the one that went with Heatles and then literally wrote it in a column, and then the next day LeBron co-opted it, and I never got any credit for it. I'll never forgive him for that. So I'm going with Wham until somebody says different. But essentially the Where Bam lineup, which people have been waiting for a long time, Erik Spoelstra unveiled it. And it was a rousing success. I mean, there's no other way to look at it. Now, it's a one-game sample size. It's not even a full-game sample size, but the fact that Erik Spoelstra went to it to start the second half and that it replicated the success that it had in the second quarter tells you that this is something he's thinking about doing more frequently. And Brady and others, and Alex, we've all talked about this, that they need something to refresh this season, particularly with the dark cloud that's been hanging over them. And this gives them that. And the fact that it worked allows them to lean into it now and see where it goes, especially as we start moving towards the next build. So it was a positive for one day, but the team at the break, not the break, but at the halfway point is 21-20. This franchise has not typically played to be 21-20. I know they're going to say, well, they were, they were 9-8 in the first Big 3 year, and I think they were 20-19 in the year that they ended up winning the championship with Shaq and Dwayne. They were 20-19. Of course, Stan walked away, and a whole bunch of things happened there. But really, the 21-20 is more reflective of where they've actually been the past 3 seasons. When they've ended up in the play-in the past 2, their net rating is still just a +1. And so this has been a fairly mediocre basketball team this year. Now, a lot of circumstances have played into that. We will get into some of those. But there's been a lot of conversation, Greg, about uncomfortable, that the Heat have had to try to, they had to be comfortable being uncomfortable with everything that's going on around them this season. And so we're going to get into 5 uncomfortable truths about this team as it stands. And we're going to talk about how they get their way out of this to make this season meaningful, because you just want the season to matter. And it has to, most Heat seasons have mattered. There have been some that we just said, oh, they're just transitional to something else, whether it was sort of 08-09 and 09-10, which was kind of just Dwayne getting back to a high level so that the big 3 could come in. Or, you look at 01-02, which was all these mercenaries who were here for 1 year, but you got Caron Butler out of it, and then you got Dwayne the year after. And so, again, it was a means to something else. The season has to be a means to something. Either you have to have success in it, or it has to be a bridge to somewhere else. And right now, we'll see. But there have been some encouraging things, but there's also been a lot of uncomfortable things. So let's get to it. Greg and I put together a list before this podcast started. And number 1, and I'm going to frame it this way. You put in here, Jimmy still needs to go. I'm going to combine it with another one that we had on our original list, which is even Heat culture is susceptible to star player drama. I think the uncomfortable truth of this first half of the season is that in the modern NBA, which has become a players' league where the players think they can get whatever they want, whether under contract or not, and I've been in favor of some of that, so I don't want to walk all of it back, but that the Heat's way of operating at times is going to clash with that new trend, and that they can't always get their way on something easily or keep their drama out of the spotlight just because that's the way they want to do business. And Jimmy Butler has tested that in a way that I don't think any other player has, even though they catered to him more than any star before. And I think the question now, as we enter the second half of the season, is how uncomfortable are they willing to get with the uncomfortable truth that even though I still believe they have leverage in this situation, they don't control everything.
It's so true. All the way down to Jimmy can make this uncomfortable even longer by opting in, but that's a conversation for another day. I think you just bring up a good point in that the infrastructure is there and the culture is in place, but in today's world, this is just transcends basketball, truthfully. Like there is, when somebody doesn't want to do something, it's going to be pretty difficult to change their mind or kind of, people are going to be people and they're going to do what they're going to do. And I just think that it kind of shows that you're not, that you just have to, I guess, take this into consideration. I think that the biggest thing that I walk away from all this Jimmy stuff with is the communication lapses. And I guess that maybe that's the learning you take into your next interaction with your next star as you're trying to build something. I feel like the communication was a lot more there with Dwayne throughout his career. And then obviously right at the very end of the one small split, there was a communication gap. And I just feel like Jimmy, there may have been even more of that. And so I guess that's the takeaway, is to try to figure out ways to bridge that gap with your next superstar. But you're right. Like, this is a situation where you can't scream culture and things just go away. Jimmy has made this uncomfortable, and only because of this Ware Bam lineup and Khalil, just the way that he played in general yesterday against Wemby, are Heat fans having, 48 hours of a little bit of hope, because it's been pretty dreadful otherwise.
Well, and I think that you take a look at where Jimmy can go from here, and you mention it, that he can make this more uncomfortable for them, and he's going to test the boundaries even more. And that could be if they don't trade him by February 6th, and then you're kind of stuck with him as a lame duck player here for 2.5 months, roughly, or however far this goes this season, and then you're dealing with a whole offseason of it until if he opts in, and then how you're going to work with him to get a return at that point. Like this is a story that I get the sense that Heat fans just want to be over. I think that the public sentiment has turned against him for the most part. I don't think it's because of us. I think it's because of actions. I mean, a lot of times we're just posting what we see. I mean, I posted the video. Brady mentioned it to me. I didn't even notice it the previous game, that Jimmy has changed his intro schedule in terms of the way he gets introduced, that he used to be over by the sideline and get introduced last with the rest of the players, and now he walks out beforehand kind of sort of hiding behind the basket until everybody else is introduced, and he kind of gives the little fist to the players as they go by. And then, it just seems like he's very separated. And then the players start to celebrate. He's not celebrating with them. I thought that he acted a little more engaged during the game. I know he had 18 points in his first game back and just 8 yesterday, but I actually thought he was better in the second game. He was on the ball more often. It seemed like Spoelstra made a point of that to keep him engaged. He wasn't standing in the corner. He wasn't standing in the dunker spot. He was running some offense. And he had 7 assists, and they were legitimate assists. It wasn't like garbage assists. He had legitimate assists, and he was interacting with other players. There were some smiles. So there was some better stuff, I thought. But to think that that's going to continue under the circumstances and the constant drumbeat of reports of him wanting to get to Phoenix. There was another one this morning from Windhorst, on the Hoop Collective, that said he only wants to go to Phoenix. I mean, this has become incredibly transparent. The Heat know what it is. He wants to get to one place. He's desperate to get from one 21-20 team to another 21-20 team. This isn't about winning a championship. It's just about a place that was going to pay him, and that's it. And so it's to have that player on your roster in a position of leadership, which he is in just because of what he's accomplished here over the past few years, is tough. And I don't see this getting more comfortable for them. And we'll do other episodes about whether or not they have to just get what they can. I mean, you could talk me into a lot of players right now, but I don't think these players are on the table. You could talk me into Brandon Ingram. You could talk me maybe into Zach LaVine. But again, I don't think that's what's being offered here right now. And so if you're talking about getting contracts that are not of like high upside players on the Bam, Tyler, Kalel, Jovic, Jaquez timeline, then I don't know. Then I guess you just hold on to him and you just let it play out. But it's going to get more uncomfortable. It just is. Like this is as soon as they lose a couple in a row again. I think it's going to be problematic regardless of what Kalel is doing. But I think that is the lesson here. I think the lesson here is that you just can't control everything. It doesn't mean that you're totally antiquated. I know fans are jumping to that. It just means that I don't know that there's any organization in the NBA that is fully equipped to handle somebody who is literally trying to burn it down.
Exactly.
Right. And I think maybe the Heat thought they were, but they're not. And I think that needs to be understood. All right. Number 2 here. I want to go to this one first, just to kind of get it out of the way. The Heat are capable of making a bad trade. They don't make a lot of bad trades, typically, Greg. Like, I think if you look at, fans, talk about them giving away draft picks to get rid of players. Those really aren't trades. Those are cap cleaning, tax cleaning,
housekeeping.
Housekeeping. They've made a bunch of those trades in recent years. But when they've made actual trades, and I know we have to go back a little bit, but if you look at the trade they made, the Winslow, you look at the first year that Jimmy was here, the Winslow, James Johnson, Dion Waiters, 3 players you wanted to get off of, particularly because you were having a dispute with Winslow at that time about how hurt he was. And you end up bringing in, 2 players who really helped you during a finals run, particularly Crowder, also Iguodala, and then Solomon Hill was good for the vibes at the very least. Like that was a great trade. It was a great trade. All right. And typically they have made good trades during the Riley era. You got to go way back to some of them. Obviously, getting Tim Hardaway when he was at his lowest level. I
thought the Gordon deal was good. If Bosch never gets injured, like or hurt or sick, however we want to classify that.
Heat fans would do that one again. Heat fans would do that one again, Greg. And obviously Rice for Zoe going all the way back. Like the Kirk Thomas for Mashburn made sense at the time, still makes sense in retrospect. Like again, I know I'm going back a ways, but they don't make bad trades unless they're pressured to make them. Like Austin trade that Pat made for Brent Barry, which didn't work out. Was more contractual. You look at the other trades that they made sign-in trades. I don't know if I count those.
And another one that didn't really work out is when you tried to save the Shaq and Wade thing with Ricky Davis and Mark Blunt for Antoine Walker and whoever else they sent out at the time. That was a moment where, you hoped maybe that you could salvage something and it didn't work out. But I think this probably informs why, one, they haven't made as many trades lately, is that I do think that there is a very, there's a high level of awareness in that building of they don't want to make a bad deal. And that is also informing how they're going about this Jimmy Butler situation. It's like they're not taking some of these contracts. Like you mentioned LaVine as someone you're open-minded to. As much as he's having a good season, he has a player option that would completely take you out of any
It's
flexibility
2026.
in 2026. Correct. But maybe
Yeah.
that's okay if he's that good. Like that's the kind of stuff you have to consider. I don't know that the Heat are, but you're right. I think that the fact that they made the Rozier trade, it didn't work out. It's made the pick situation even that much more they can't really attach any kind of asset to Terry to get off of him or any other player on the roster. Like that's not really in the mix right now. So you don't want to make another bad trade, I guess, is where I'm going here. Is like, since this Rozier move has kind of looked like they should have held on there, maybe spent their mid-level exception instead, held on to the draft pick. It's hard to believe. We were both for the deal, but I guess that is why they're not just going to take whatever back for Jimmy Butler in this situation. They're not going to make a bad trade.
Well, excuse me. If you look at their other trades, the Shaq trade was not a bad trade. This trading Shaq for Sean Marion, they ended up trading for Jermaine, then they cleared out Jermaine, and ended up setting themselves up for 2010. You look at the trades that were made in the 05 offseason, which I didn't like at the time, but Antoine Walker, Jason Williams, James Posey, good trades as it turned out. So the Rozier trade does stick out like a sore thumb, and we have to both acknowledge, as you did, that we were in favor of it. And it hasn't worked out. And even those like Mike Ryan on the Levitard show, who I was going at last year, he was right. You go get a guy who basically is putting up big numbers, even if they were somewhat efficient numbers, which is kind of what fooled me. But putting up big numbers on a bad team, you always have it's buyer beware in those situations. And what you wanted him to provide for you, which was this rim pressure, is negated by the fact that he doesn't finish at the rim. So it's kind of, and he's not an elite passer, so he's an okay passer. So it's not like he makes up for it that way. And then the 3-point shooting is so streaky. The defense is not good enough.
And he dribbles a lot.
And then sometimes he picks up his dribble right as he crosses half court. And you're kind of like, I don't know. It's just like, I don't know where these actions are going. And now you're trying to salvage it by basically, like yesterday, he looked better in that role.
Last
he looked
2
better.
games,
He was
he's looked okay.
He's looked better. He was on the court for that. But the question is, even at the highest level that he's going to get to, there's not going to be any way to justify giving up the Lowry contract and a first-round pick for it. There's just not. And I'm not saying giving up Lowry. Lowry, that ship had sailed for me and for them. But giving up the Lowry contract and again, both you and I were in favor of it, and we even used it as a litmus test on, are they serious about helping Jimmy? And they make the trade, and it has been – the uncomfortable truth is it has not worked, and I don't think it can be salvaged. So that's kind of where that's at. All right, we'll get to the three others here in a second. Before we do, I want to mention a great sponsor of the 5 Reasons Sports Network. It's Underdog Fantasy. You can find them at underdogfantasy.com or check out the app at your app store. Underdog is the best place to cash in on all your takes during the football playoffs. We're now reached championship games. Which players are going off? Which ones are ice cold? More Josh Allen, more Patrick Mahomes, more Jalen Hurts. I'm rooting for Jaden Daniels. And with over 5 million happy players and 2 billion won, Underdog makes it fun and easy to cash in all your favorite athletes' performances. Every dog deserves a second chance. With Underdog Rescues, you can get your money back and receive a promo if an early injury causes your entry to lose. So check it out. Underdog, the place to play. Pick 'em, download the app, sign up with the code 5, promo code 5FIVE, and deposit now to get up to $1,000 of bonus cash instantly. That's the promo code FIVE. You must be 18 years or older, 19 or older in Alabama and Nebraska, 19 or older in Colorado for some games, 21 or older in Massachusetts and Arizona, and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. Void in Colorado for some games. If you're concerned with your play, call 1-800-GAMBLER. Visit www.ncpgambling.org. All right, we got 2 uncomfortable truths I want to get to back here because I think they're somewhat aligned. Greg, has Bam hit his ceiling?
It's hard to not say. I mean, like, I'm basically going to get hate mail if I don't answer this question as some form of yes, right? Because he's having a really rough season. I think that it's less about that he's hit his ceiling, in my view, and more about that there is definitely some situational, like there's basically qualifiers for him to continue to ascend and particularly offensively. I think the defensive stuff is less of an issue, and really the rebounding I'm not as worried about. But this is more the question of, if you're building a team, can Bam be your second option on offense? I think we've kind of learned that we can't necessarily count on that this season. And if you were to ever count on it, it kind of looks like you're probably going to have to build a roster in a very specific way with the right kind of players that complement him and can find him in certain spaces. I mean, I just think about the alley-oops just from the San Antonio game, the crazy one he caught. And maybe that there's new lineups that'll unlock that. And we'll talk about that more later. But to me, this is a basically you wanted to find out if Bam could ever become a guy that you just throw the ball down to and get buckets from. And I don't know that that's necessarily where we're heading here. So it doesn't mean that he can't be, a second or third best player on a championship level team. To me, I still think that's in play. I think he's having a slump of a season, and I'm not going to abandon what I've seen previously just for this season. People are going to hate me for that. That's fine. I still think he can play much better than you're seeing this year, but fans on social media saying things like he's basically a glorified Nick Claxton now. Nick Claxton averages 9.7 points per game. Like, that's not what Bam's doing, even though it feels like that. We have such high standards. I know I'm the one who's been shouting it from the rooftops. It just means you got to build differently. And I think you have to have guys that can, kind of take over the scoring load and put him in position to get the buckets in his comfort zone, because he's been pushed out of his comfort zone, shooting threes in corners and doing stuff like that. And it hasn't translated into him looking better offensively. So I think now it's kind of pivoting back the other direction. And maybe you have the flexibility to do that with, I think, something we're going to talk about as another truth coming up here in a bit.
Yeah, no, we are going to talk about that as part of number 4. And I'll just say this about the Bam thing. You mentioned the shooting threes and all this. Just get him back to what he's comfortable doing. Yeah. That's it. The 3-ball thing the experiment has not worked. He has increased his volume. He's not improved his accuracy. I know he's capable of making them. That's not really the issue here. But just because someone's capable of making them doesn't necessarily mean that's what they should be leaning towards. And this has been my hesitation on it. I was one of those who was hesitant about Bosch doing this, but Bosch's shooting stroke, I mean, I was wrong about Bosch, because Bosch was an elite 18 to 20 foot jump shooter, just elite. I mean, Bosch was an elite is a Hall of Fame offensive player. He became a very good defensive player in Miami, but Bam is the opposite. Bam is a Hall of Fame caliber defensive player who the offense, just like for Zoe, by the way, has been something that has had to be worked on. Now, Zoe is a little different because that was in the age of the low post center. And so even though Zoe was kind of clunky down there at times, his effort, he had go-to moves, and his relentlessness was part of it, right? Like, you never had to question whether Zoe was going to keep going back up or was going to keep shooting or any of that. I know for this for sure, okay? When Zoe sits there watching games and he watches Bam and Jimmy pass out from the post, he loses his mind. Okay? He loses his mind. Like, when we see them do this stuff to kick out the 3-point shooters, because Zoe, there was no question. Like, and it wasn't always going to be pretty, but he was going to go. Bam does not have that mentality. All right. And he doesn't have that low post game. If I was to say what he needs to work on, and we're going to play into this in number 4 here, it's beating guys off the dribble. I think now he's got to get his handle tighter, okay, to be able to do that. He loses the ball down low a lot. I don't think he's ever going to be a great post player, but he needs to develop a little bit more of a post. He needs to develop some kind of a go-to down there, something
in the
that he can get to
specifically.
That he could get to consistently. And I just think that's something to look at in the half court. But the 3-ball, like, if it's there and there's nothing else, okay. But I just to me that thing was why did you need him to be your best 3-point shooter or one of your better 3-point shooters? If you're going to lean into Duncan and Tyler, then what is the need for? Was it just because you needed to create space for Jimmy? Because if that's the case, then that's not really going to be an issue going forward as much anymore. Mm-hmm. And so I don't see the point of that. I would get him. He's got to get his handle tighter. He has the first step to get by defenders. And I think now we're going to see it. And let's get to number 4 on this. Uncomfortable truth is that small ball is dead. And Erik Spoelstra needs to let it go. That's where I'm at. Mm-hmm. Okay? He needs to let it go.
Especially when the real tall player that we're going to talk about is averaging 40% from 3. I'll be on small volume.
On small volume. But I look, I love Haywood Highsmith, okay? Oops, sorry. as I just dropped with Trey. I love Haywood Highsmith, okay? As a defender, as a role player. He's not and I know Sean's going to get on me about it. He's not a 4. Okay. I mean, they've been doing this thing now with Caleb, with him, with PJ Tucker took up a ton of space widthwise. Okay. And because he was great at boxing out, Bam had maybe his best rebounding season. But small ball, I'm with Pat on this one now. The game has turned back. Spo introduced pace and space. He took a lot from Mike D'Antoni, Don Nelson, others. There's a lot of creativity that was involved there. And obviously putting Bosch at the 5 was huge in terms of the Heat's run. He kind of found it by accident, but then he went with it. Shane at the 4, all that. But no, the league has cycled back. Teams are playing 2 bigs more consistently now. They've got positional size if they don't have the 2 bigs. And we saw it against Denver. Like that, to me, that was like the last. It's been against Denver every time that this has shown up. Every time, okay, where they're just smaller at every position. And at this point, okay, I'm going to go with a place that I know people have wanted me to go for a while, and I haven't gone there. Just play the big guys. Play the big guys. Play Wham. That's what it is. Play where with Bam, okay, as much as possible. You've got Jovic, who's also bulked up a little bit, getting close to 7 feet. You shouldn't have other players playing at the 4 spot. That's it. Kevin Love at this point is a situational player and a locker room guy. You can plug him in certain matchups. But I would add another big to the mix at this stage. And I would keep adding – to me, if you have Tyler Hero as your shortest player on the floor, you're in good shape. Because that's where a lot of other teams are. Right. That's what you want. Okay. So maybe you don't have to necessarily go Ware and Bam all the time together. But if you have Jovic in there, if you've got Jovic playing as kind of an oversized point guard at times or point forward, that's what you want. That's where the league has gone. The league has gotten bigger. And I just think Spo has got to readjust. He's always been ahead of the times on this one. They have added players now to give him more in his arsenal. You know, it's one thing to say play bigs, and then you're giving him, Dwayne Dedman and Thomas Bryant, Ronny Turioff going way back, or washed Eddie Curry or washed Greg Oden or Dexter Pittman and all that. No, they have skilled bigs on this roster now. Like, this is the best group of skilled bigs they've had between Jovic, Ware, and Bam. Play them all together. I'm fine with that. Let's experiment with that, okay? They need to play bigger because I think that will play into number 3 here, which is I do think that it will take pressure off Bam. He seems to want it. It'll also get him out on the wing a little bit more often where he's going to be guarded by guys he can go past. It's going to create switching nightmares, I think, for teams. And then defensively, it's going to allow Bam to roam, which is where he's at his best and covering for everybody. And then he's got Ware behind him. Heat fans, you got me, okay? It's time for Spo to play bigger.
And to your point, just to I think a good example of it is like when you have Ware out there, because Bam is so smart defensively also, like having him roam and have to make decisions and reads and stuff like that. And he's also quick-footed enough to where I think that maybe part of Spo's aversion to playing big is that he's worried about getting slower. And because I'm not going to call this team fast to begin with. So it's like, do you become slower? Do you become more challenged offensively? But we're seeing that like with Ware and Bam out there, you're not necessarily sacrificing the offense. And on defense, you're actually gaining flexibility because Bam being in this other role where he doesn't need to be the last line of defense, deep and drop every single game like that. It's just an interesting, his face lit up when Brady asked him about it, about just the ability to kind of do different things. I think it was Brady who asked, whoever did. So I think that it is time. And that is also, I think that this plays back into kind of your philosophy on how you build. I think that to your point about getting more bigs, maybe if you're looking at what you can get for Jimmy Butler, getting back another big to kind of throw in this mix is not the worst thing in the world to hear. So I don't know who that player is yet, but that might not, if they're looking at different packages, whereas once I may have said, you need to lean in a different direction and go with maybe a guard, maybe getting back a big is not the worst thing.
Bigger a wing, a big wing. To me, that's where this has to go, which is why I say I could be talked into like Brandon Ingram as part of this build. If you don't have to pay him what he was asking for before, because he's not a $50 million a year player. Is he a $30 million a year player? If you could get him to play more often, you got availability issues there too, but he's 27. Let's get to number 5 on this because I think this plays into it too. I think the uncomfortable truth here is that 2 timelines doesn't work. Golden State tried it, and they won a championship with it in kind of a depleted year. I still feel like the Heat would have won the title that year if that Jimmy shot had gone down and they got into the finals. But the 2 timelines things is just too hard to execute. I think you need to pick a direction. And the one positive of this Jimmy Butler situation is it has forced their direction.
Mm-hmm.
It's forced it. Because probably, look, again, Jimmy's done great things for the organization. It was not sustainable to have a 35-year-old who's got a lot of wear, going back to the Tibbs years, did not have the long playoff runs before he came to Miami, but has had them since in a very compressed period of time. Okay. Has had increasing injuries and ailments, the ankle, the knee. You got the wrist going back to the Philadelphia days, but there's just a lot of stuff there. And ultimately giving him the going away package present that, we argued, even some argued against with Dwayne, was probably not the best thing for this organization. And I feel like it is something they would have considered after the season at more years, at less per year. And then you're talking about having him on the books for 3 seasons potentially. And if it's not going well now, I don't see how it would have gone better when he was 37 or 38. And so his actions, although I don't think either you or I agree with them, in the long run, it's kind of like when somebody leaves you that wasn't right for you.
Yeah. I mean, it's forced.
Another door opens.
You're right. And it'll be interesting to see if they take this moment to really reprioritize and kind of organize towards one specific moment to improve, or if it's if they're going to have to take on some bridge players that are just going to inevitably take up what flexibility they could gain. See, that's the thing here, Ethan. Like if by him just expiring, that's more like that feels better than taking on salary for him. They may just ride this out and be uncomfortable with it. But there's no doubt that in my mind that the Jimmy Butler era is over. So now you can start to think about what does the next iteration of the Miami Heat look like. And I think the one other good thing about this, when we talk about 2 timelines, is that they're drafting so well right now that forget trying to do this whole 2 timeline thing. Had Jimmy won you a title so far, I think you probably prioritize giving him the balloon payment, the going away present, whatever we're going to call it. But that didn't happen. And so ultimately 6 years, you got to move on. They've drafted enough good players that I think you feel good about where they are with that process. So lean into it more. And that may be how you build your next team. Particularly when you see Ware and Bam and the way that the league is gone and just the way that Wemby, and I know it's one game, but it was interesting to see the Heat not look like the smallest team on planet Earth. And so maybe that's like something you lean into going forward. And that's exciting. I think fans can get excited about that. But they've been forced to pick a direction, and it probably is for the best, even though they're right now going through a lot of uncomfortable truths, ones far beyond the ones we've talked about on this episode.
Well, look, there are a couple of things they may have been saved for themselves. I mean, it appears that they were saved for themselves by Caleb Martin's agent turning down a much better deal than he ended up getting. And it appears that they've been saved from themselves by ultimately maybe considering giving Jimmy Butler a very lucrative extension. Maybe not the one he wanted, but if they had sat down, maybe they give him something that doesn't end up working out. And I do think the fans can get behind a young team, provided that they know that, A, the young players have upside. They're not a bunch of undrafteds. They are guys who have come in the league and contributed right away. Okay, and Tyler is 25 years old today. He is not even in his prime yet, but he's had a breakout season. We've talked about the frustrations with Bam, but you know the things Bam can do. So you know that he can be a functional. Obviously, the contract is going to be an issue if he's not providing more offensively. But at least you know you got a baseline defensively with him in terms of what he anchors. Hawkins has looked better of late. Jovic, to me, I just think if you get Nico in the right role, there's just so much there. There's just a lot. I just really like him as a player. I do. I just think they have to find the right role for him, and that is more on-ball reps. And the way the roster is constructed now, there's opportunities for him with that. He also has great chemistry with Ware, which is huge. And you're talking about guys who are 21 and 20 years old, and now we start to see some of it with Ware. I think Larson has a part in this build as a plug-and-play rotation player. So you're talking about 6 guys. We haven't even seen Keshad Johnson yet, who I think is tantalizing. You've got Highsmith on a cheap contract for at least one more year. Like, there's some stuff you can really work with there. And then you have Duncan here to help catalyze the offense, or as a possible trade candidate as his contract becomes not, partial guarantee next year. So there's some positives. So for all the uncomfortable truth, like, this has been kind of staring us in the face the whole time. What is this organization best at right now? Drafting.
Who would have thunk it?
Who would have thought? But this organization, with Chet still around and Adam Simon running it, and more of an emphasis on it, this organization, which was not a great drafting organization for a very long period of time, okay, some hits, okay, but a lot of misses, and a lot of places where they were drafting where they really didn't care if they kept the pick, or there was a string of.
It was just they didn't really prioritize the process.
The Wade Simeons and the Tim Jameses, he's local. I saw him on TV. I'm not saying it was quite that bad. Charles Smith, it's not even the right Charles Smith. It was a Charles Smith from New Mexico State. A lot of guys they drafted, there was just like, okay, whatever. I mean, it was basically, or you pass on Draymond Green to take, what was it, Arnell Moultrie, and then you're dumping him for cash considerations or whatever. Like, that's not where they're at right now. Like, they identify guys who fit their culture, fit their system, but have upsides. And that's different. That's different than a bunch of undrafteds. The problem with the undrafteds and overpaying the undrafted is eventually their flaws start to show. Yeah. Right? And for most of them, their flaws have shown in other places. Now, Max seems to be the exclusion to this. He's fitting, but he was hurt a good portion of this year where Cleveland's gone on its run. But I think Max is a good player. I think Caleb's a good player in the right system, not worth what the Heat were willing to give to him. I think we've seen with Gabe, what he kind of is, okay? And then you can go, there's a long list of guys prior to that. But those guys had, the Rodney McGruders, there is a cap on where they could go. I don't think there's a cap on Jovic. I don't think there's a cap on Ware. We'll see about Jaquez, okay? There doesn't seem to be a cap on Tyler. He's busted through it. Bam, maybe there's a cap now, but it's at a pretty high level in terms of where he's gotten to in the league from being the 14th overall pick. So I do feel like there is, for all the uncomfortable truths we're talking about, the biggest uncomfortable truth is I think the Heat had to give up that we're contending for a championship ghost for right now, and lean into what they're doing well. That's not giving up more picks to throw at the situation like they did with Rozier last year to try to placate Jimmy or give Jimmy a chance. Unfortunately, we can argue about whether they should have done more when Jimmy was at his peak. He's not at his peak anymore. It's time to transition to another build. His behavior has forced it, but ultimately it's where it needed to go. And I think they just need to run with it. And the other uncomfortable truth here is it's going to be tough to chase some of these other teams. When you're talking about an OKC team that already is playing like 80% ball right now, and they got 15 first-round picks coming up in the next 5 years or whatever it is. And then you look at some of the other teams, San Antonio and what they're building. Boston is still obviously up there. Cleveland seems to have found a formula. This is not going to be easy. You have to lean into your strengths. Your strengths right now are identifying players that fit your system, and hopefully your coach can bring them along in the right way to make it work. And that's, I think, where they're at. And then the next star wants to play here with these guys. I think there has to be patience right now with all these situations. So to me, the biggest uncomfortable truth is what Jimmy Butler has done to the Heat this year is ultimately good for the Heat. Greg, appreciate it. Check out our sponsors, Underdog. Use the code 5, FIVE, and also Water Cleanup of Florida, WCUFL.com.
Thank you for listening to the 5 on the Floor on the 5 Reasons Sports Network. After all, someone needs to listen to my dad.